Now that we know how to bind a variable to the ID attribute, we are going to use a singleton IDed to generate unique IDs. You can use your own method, of course. This is just an example. I already wrote the code. It is a simple class that only creates an instance of itself. I created it inside the utils folder. So inside the GS folder, I added a new folder named utils and then a new file named core.js. Every utility function will be inside this utils folder, and then we can have several files based on the type of the functions or on the type of use we have for them. About the core.js file, it is a JavaScript file very similar to our view models, with the define function where we can load modules we need, and then we have the class core utils. If the instance is already created, the class will return it, otherwise it creates a new instance. And why am I using this? Because we want to use the generate unique ID method declared here across all the pages we will develop. That means we will load the util/core.js file several times, and also we want to keep track of the last value, the last generated ID. So this is a way of having all of that. You can make a distinct approach if you want, and for the demonstration purposes I will use this one. So the class have this instance variable, the counter, and we are returning a unique ID by concatenating the string, the base string UID with the counter instance variable, and we are incrementing it every time we are calling the generate unique ID method. To use it, we need to load the core.js file in our view model. Let's include that in the customers JS file. As we want to store the module in a variable, we need to put it in a specific position. I'm not allowed to load the file here, utils.core with capital. If I do that, then use core utils as the name I want for my variable. This variable will hold the OJET input text module, so I need to have it as the second position of inside the array. So now I have a direct mapping between the module and the variable, and then I just need to use it. And for now, let's see the value we are getting by calling it. So let's copy the name of the method and let's call it several times and see what we can get. Open console and go to the customers. As soon as it is being loaded, we can see the different UIDs that we are generating. We can assign a unique UID value to each of our input ID attribute. And we can also see if we use the generate unique ID method in another view model, it will increase the value and we will not have duplicated IDs. And that's why I'm using a singleton. So let's use the same approach. And then in about page, I'm going to load the core utils class, and I'm going to do the same by having the logs in our console. And before that, let me write about page. If I go to the customers, I will have ID 0 to 3. And in about we'll have the ID 4. Let's clear this. We can use this generated ID and assign it as the value for the first name ID, the input first name ID. We are binding here with column notation. Let us see if it is working. And yes, we have the UID-0. We can add the dynamic values for every input, so let's do that. This will be the last name ID, the full name ID, don't forget column notation, then will be the weight, and it will be the age, first one, and the column notation. Now we need to define all these variables here. So we have the first name, let's get the last name, the full name, the weight, and the age ID. So we are dynamically assigning the IDs to avoid duplicated IDs across all the app. Let's save that to see. We have an ID, a dynamic ID, the ID1, the ID2, and the ID0. You can also create different kind of IDs. You can even specify an ID according to the HTML element type. For instance, you can use UID input if it is an input and have some kind of param to change this, or even use the param you are receiving there as a variable in the string. For now, let's keep it simple and use the UID dash and then the counter. And we are now generating dynamic IDs and unique IDs. Now, about the labels, let's see how OracleJet uses translations. I will leave these two links in the description. This one tells you how OracleJet identifies the language we are using by either using the lang attribute in the HTML tag or using the browser property. And inside this link we can see how to build the files with all the translations. And let's start by doing that. We need a resources folder that inside has an NLS folder, and then we can have the different translations. And the base file for the translations, the root one, that is the default one when the OracleJet cannot resolve the language the user is using, will be inside these OJET translations. So let's start by doing that. Inside GS, new folder resources. Inside that we'll have the NLS, and we will have a GS file, the base file. Let's call it my first app translations.js. And then inside we need to follow a specific format. We can copy that and paste it here. This root property is required. Without that, OracleJet will not know what is the base translations to use. So let's clear that to use our own. And after declaring the root property, where inside we will have all the translations, the custom translations for our app, then we need to specify the other supported languages we can use. I will use the Portuguese one, as I am Portuguese, by the way. So then I need to specify it, and it will be inside the NLS folder. I need to create a folder with the pt-pt name, and inside I will have the same GS file with the same name, and inside of it, it will not have the root property, so I can delete it, and it will not have the support locales as well. You'll have just the properties we need. Let's use the inputs here, and then first name, and the translations will be nom, and we will have the same here inside the root, but translation it will be in English, and it will be our root language, it will be name. What to do next? After having all the translations, we need to add this configuration to the main.js file so it can load the custom translations. Main.js, we have this end injector, we add a comma, and then we add our config. And here we need to change it put here the name of our file. Let's copy that. So it will point to the files where we have the translations, to the custom files, and we'll also have the OJET based translations. We can name it as we want, but we need to be consistent and have that name here. Let's reload all the content just to be sure. Okay, now how can we use the translations? We need to go to the customers.js and we need to load the translations module. Again, we will need to store the module inside a variable. So let's put it as the first one this time, and the module name will be OJS/translation, and the variable will be translations. Got to comma. To use the translation, we need to use the variable and then the get translated string method. Then inside we need to specify the path of our object. In our case is inputs.firstname. If you recall, inputs and first name. Let's save it and see if it is working. Apparently we are having problem. So I made a mistake in the module's name. It is OJET translation, and now it should work. Yeah, we have the page being loaded. If you now change your base translation and have exclamation mark, it will have there. So we are now using the translation. How can we see the Portuguese translation working? We can have different approaches. You can go to the index.html and change directly here to pt-pt. It will reload with the Portuguese translation. If we remove the lang attribute, OracleJet will use the browser's language. So as I am using an English browser, I cannot show that to you, but let me delete that. And as you can see, this is in English and we have name. But if I open my Chrome and go to the same page, you can see that I have the Portuguese translation there, and I have everything in Portuguese. At least if you don't know Portuguese, at least you can see there is not English. So let's close that. We now know how to use translations in our app. Let's keep the name, in this case first name translation, and add some more. So we want the last name, and we want the full name, and we want the weight and the age. So now we need to save it and assign a variable to all these label int attributes. Input last name label, this will be full name, this will be weight, and the last one the age. And now we need to define here the last name label, the full name label, the weight label, the age label. Of course we need to change this, so it will be, let me put this, so it will be last name, it will be full name, and it will be weight, and it will be age. So saving that, we have some problem with this translation. Let me see, somehow I deleted that, so now it should be there. If you somehow miss the path, let me show to you again. If you miss some path, it will show you the path you put there and not the real translation. To avoid having this long declaration, we can have some kind of abstraction by getting a variable. Let's call it t_t for translation equals to the get translated string method, and then we can replace all of this with this, and it will be cleaner and easier to declare. So we now have translations, we have unique IDs being generated, we are ready to go.